Snow fell not as a storm, but as a memory, each flake soft as a breath against the windshield. Officer Elias Wren gripped the steering wheel tighter, the leather cold beneath his gloves, his eyes fixed on the endless white stretching before him. The radio hissed softly in the background, then went quiet, as though even the static had frozen in the air. His headlights carved out two narrow tunnels of light that vanished into the dark throat of the blizzard. Somewhere beyond that curtain of snow, the mountain road twisted down toward Hollow Creek, but he could no longer tell where pavement ended and the sky began. He should have stayed in town. That's what Sheriff Holt would have said, or maybe what Mara Lark would have whispered if she'd had the courage to speak to him anymore. But Elias couldn't stand the walls, the warmth, or the people who looked at him with that kind of quiet pity. Every winter since the Wilson boy drowned, they saw his face and remembered the one he hadn't saved. The storm outside seemed easier to face than those eyes inside the diner, the church, the station. The wipers scraped once, twice, then stopped. A low groan from under the hood followed, and the truck's engine stuttered like an old man's breath. "Come on," Elias muttered, coaxing it forward. The wheels spun, snow thickened. Then a blur darted across the road, a deer or something wilder. He jerked the wheel instinctively. Tires shrieked against ice. The world turned. Metal screamed as the front end slammed into a snowbank. Airbags burst open with the sound of thunder wrapped in cloth. The seatbelt bit into his chest, stealing the air from his lungs. When silence came again, it was deep and absolute, broken only by the faint ticking of the cooling engine. Elias sat still, his pulse echoing in his ears. Snowflakes drifted through the cracked windshield, melting on his cheek before they froze again. Pain radiated from his shoulder, sharp and insistent. He tried the radio once more. Dead. His flashlight flickered, dim. For a long time he just listened, the kind of listening that belongs to men who've run out of things to say to themselves. Outside, the storm kept on. Somewhere beyond that curtain of white, another creature moved, a shadow against the snow, large and limping. Ash had been wandering since the winter before, since the avalanche took the man he'd once followed into every storm. The collar still hung around his neck, the tag dulled by frost and time. Hunger gnawed at him, but instinct whispered louder, the smell of blood, oil, cold metal. He followed it. Elias, half-conscious, thought he heard the wind take on a strange rhythm, a scratching, a muffled bark. He blinked, head heavy, vision tunneling. Something dark pressed against the side window, snow cascading off a thick coat of fur. Then a sound, the steady thump of paws against glass. A shape, a dog, stood against the storm. At first he thought he was dreaming. The old guilt played tricks on him often, conjuring Rook, his late K9 partner, out of shadow and memory. "Rook," he rasped, voice raw. The figure didn't vanish. It barked once, sharp and alive, the sound cutting through the howling wind like a promise. Elias pressed his palm weakly against the window, the glass fogged beneath his breath. The dog tilted its head, eyes catching the faint beam of his flashlight. In those eyes, something burned, not wildness, but recognition. The creature dug, furiously at the snow, carving a shallow trench beside the door. Gritting his teeth, Elias shoved at the handle. It gave after a long, frozen groan. He tumbled out into the cold, landing hard on his side. The air stole every bit of warmth he had left. He crawled, dragging his bad arm, until he felt the rough fur under his fingertips. The dog stood still as stone, letting him lean into its warmth. "Good boy," Elias whispered. His breath came out in clouds that drifted upward, then vanished. The two shapes, man and dog, sat pressed against the wreck, surrounded by a sea of white. Time slowed until it felt like they were no longer inside a storm, but inside a memory of one. Elias closed his eyes. He could almost hear a boy's voice again, echoing from years ago. "Help's coming, right, Officer Wren?" But help hadn't. "Come then," And he'd never forgiven himself for that silence after. Ash nudged him with his muzzle, persistent. Elias stirred, forced himself to stand. The dog began to walk, slow but certain, glancing back each few steps as if commanding him to follow. Elias obeyed, legs trembling. Behind them, the truck's headlights dimmed and went out, swallowed by the blizzard. In Hollow Creek, the storm had already trapped the town inside its own kind of waiting. Mrs. Callan peered through her frosted window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. "That fool Wren's out there again," she murmured, not without affection. The woman sitting opposite her, Mara Lark, didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the snow building along the windowsill, the same kind of snow that had taken her brother 3 winters past. "He never did forgive himself," Mrs. Callan went on, the words more sigh than gossip. "A man like that don't see ghosts. He carries them." Mara finally spoke, her voice low, almost to herself. "Some men aren't haunted. They're trying to be forgiven." The old woman watched her, the candlelight trembling between them. Outside, the wind wailed through the eaves, carrying whispers none of them could name. Miles away, Elias followed Ash through drifts that reached his knees. Each breath cut through his lungs like glass. The dog would stop, look back, then press on. There was intelligence in that gaze, a memory of command. Somewhere inside the haze of pain and exhaustion, Elias found himself whispering, "Good boy, Rook." And the dog didn't correct him. When he stumbled, Ash circled back, nudging him upright with his shoulder. When he fell again, the dog lay beside him, sharing warmth. Elias wrapped one arm weakly around its neck. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered, eyes half closed. The dog licked the frost from his beard, quiet and steadfast. Night bled into dawn without a sunrise, only the faint paling of the storm. Snow still fell, but softer now, as if tired. The wind eased into silence. Elias blinked against the light. Around them, the world looked new, untouched, infinite. He rose shakily to his feet. The dog trotted a few paces ahead, pausing until Elias followed. Together they descended toward the valley, toward the barely visible lights of Hollow Creek glowing like small promises beneath the mountains. By the time the town stirred that morning, someone had already spotted the faint trail in the snow. 2 sets of prints, one human, one canine, winding down from the ridge. Mrs. Callan, wrapped in a shawl, leaned over her porch rail and squinted through the gray. "Would you look at that?" she whispered. At the inn, Mara stood by the window. The frost patterns shimmered like wings as the first beam of sunlight broke through the clouds. She saw the distant movement, 2 shapes against the white, small but steady. The whisper began before anyone knew the truth. It spread from kitchen to street corner to church pew. That something wild had found a man not worth finding. That maybe even the storm itself had taken pity on him. Elias didn't hear the gossip when he reached the edge of town. His world had narrowed to the sound of his boots crunching on ice, the dog's steady breathing beside him, and the slow dawning understanding that he hadn't survived by chance. As he crossed the wooden bridge into Hollow Creek, the snow eased into delicate flurries. The river below murmured faintly under a thin crust of ice. He looked down, seeing his reflection next to the dog's. 2 survivors, 1 promise. Ash stopped, turned, and met his gaze. Something in that silent exchange bridged the distance between every failure, every regret that had ever hollowed him out. Elias reached down and touched the collar tag, brushing away the frost until the letters shone faintly. "Ash. Guess we both got left behind," he said softly. The dog wagged its tail once, a slow, deliberate motion. They moved again, step for step, into the awakening town. Behind them, the snow began to cover their footprints, erasing the evidence of where they'd come from. Ahead, smoke rose from chimneys, and somewhere a bell chimed for morning. Elias felt something shift inside him. Not redemption, not yet, but the smallest flicker of warmth. A beginning. The kind that could carry a man through one more winter, and far above, where the clouds began to break, sunlight slipped through in threads, turning the frozen world to gold. The storm had ended, but its whisper lingered in the air, soft and certain. Sometimes the lost are found by what the world itself tries to forget. The man and the dog disappeared beyond the edge of town, two quiet silhouettes moving toward whatever forgiveness waited there. The snow fell gently behind them, and the wind carried their story home. The morning after the storm, Hollow Creek stirred as if waking from a long-held breath. The sky, pale and untroubled, stretched above rooftops still heavy with snow. Smoke rose from chimneys in slow blue spirals. Elias Wren stood at the window of Mara Lark's inn, his arm bound in a sling, the scent of wood smoke clinging to his clothes. Below, the town moved in hesitant rhythms. The sound of shovels scraping, children laughing, and somewhere a dog barking in the distance. Ash lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, the steady rise and fall of his chest a quiet reassurance that the night had been real. Mara appeared behind him with a steaming cup. Her hands, small but sure, brushed against his as she passed it over. Neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It had texture, something warm like shared survival. Outside, the townsfolk watched them both through windows, whispering their own versions of the story. The man who had vanished into the blizzard. The stray that brought him home. Hollow Creek had always needed its tales to make sense of itself, and for once, this one felt almost holy. Ash's ear twitched. He lifted his head, gaze sharp toward the window. Elias followed it, a group of townspeople crossing the street led by Mayor Tobias Crane, his fur coat too fine for the season. The mayor's expression was carved from disapproval and something close to envy. A stray dog sleeping at the innkeeper's hearth didn't fit the town's order. "Wren," he called, voice firm but falsely kind. "We need a word." Elias descended the narrow stairs, the air cool and scented with pine soap. Ash followed, tail low but alert. Outside, Tobias stood flanked by two men from the council, their faces stiff as the cold. "Glad to see you on your feet," Tobias began, though the words felt like ceremony, not sincerity. "Heard quite the story, a stray saving a man. But we can't have wild dogs roaming the streets. Not safe. We'll take him to the shelter." Elias met his eyes without blinking. "He's not wild. He saved my life." "Still," Tobias pressed, "rules are rules. We can't risk another accident." Mara appeared in the doorway, her shawl drawn tight. "Neither can we risk losing the only creature in this town who still knows loyalty." The quiet in her tone made the mayor falter. Around them, people had begun to gather. Neighbors pretending to pass by but stopping within earshot. The gossip that once condemned Elias now seemed to hover in uncertainty, waiting to choose its side. Tobias cleared his throat, uneasy. "The council will decide by evening. Until then, keep it leashed." He turned and left, boots crunching sharply against the snow. When the crowd dispersed, Mara looked at Elias. Her voice softened. "They'll find a way to take him if you don't give them a reason not to." Elias nodded, the old instinct of obedience surfacing. Follow the rule, stay quiet, survive. But as he looked down at Ash, the dog's steady gaze rooted him to something truer than authority. This creature had found him in a storm and refused to leave. Some loyalties didn't need laws to validate them. The next few days passed in muted rhythms. Elias helped mend the inn's fence, his good arm learning the rhythm of work again. Mara would bring him tea at dusk, sometimes sitting beside him by the fire. Their conversations were simple. How the storm had damaged the roof, how the creek would thaw come spring, yet each word carried the unspoken weight of loss, slowly turning into trust. Ash, now a fixture of the inn, would sleep near the hearth, occasionally lifting his head when townsfolk entered. Children began to linger by the doorway, whispering stories about the ghost dog who dragged a man out of death's arms. Even Mrs. Callan, queen of town gossip, softened her tone. "Miracles come in odd shapes," she told anyone who'd listen, "and this one's got fur." But peace never lasts long in places that thrive on judgment. A week later, another storm crept down from the ridge, smaller, meaner, unexpected. By dusk, snow began to fall again, carried by wind that rattled shutters and whispered warnings. The inn's windows glowed amber, and Elias sat by the fire polishing his badge. He hadn't worn it since before the crash, but something in him stirred at the weight of it. A call from outside interrupted his thoughts. Frantic pounding on the door, a man's voice, breathless and raw. "Sheriff! The Crane boy! He's gone!" Ran off toward the creek before the storm hit. Elias was on his feet before he knew it, coat already in hand. Ash barked once, sharp and eager, understanding before anyone spoke. Mara's voice trembled from behind him. "Elias, you can't go out there again, not in this—" But he only glanced back, the firelight flickering across his face. "You know I have to." Outside, the wind greeted him like an old rival. Snow slashed across his cheeks, stinging. Ash bounded ahead, his dark coat vanishing into the storm. They followed the faint trail toward the river where the ice grew thin. The cold gnawed deeper than before, but Elias no longer felt afraid. He was past the point of fearing what might break him. Ash barked again, louder now. Through the white haze, Elias saw a flash of red, the boy's jacket, caught between branches near the creek's edge. Ice cracked beneath each step as he hurried forward. "Ben!" he called, voice swallowed by the wind. The boy stirred weakly, half submerged. Elias dropped to his knees, reaching into the freezing water. Pain shot up his arm, but he didn't stop. Ash darted forward, grabbing the boy's sleeve gently in his jaws, pulling with desperate strength. Together, man and dog lifted the child from the water. The boy coughed, alive. Elias wrapped him in his coat, cradling him close. Then the ice beneath them groaned, deep, hollow, final. It shattered. Elias shoved the boy toward the bank just as he fell through, the world exploding into black water and white noise. The cold tore the air from his lungs. Above, he heard Ash barking, pacing, whining. He fought upward, vision dimming. Then something seized his collar. Teeth, unrelenting. The dog pulled, muscles straining, claws scraping at the ice. Elias broke through the surface, gasping. He crawled onto the bank, body trembling, clutching at Ash's fur. For a moment, neither moved. The snow fell quieter now, as though the world itself held its breath. By the time they reached town, the storm had already begun to fade. Lights flickered in windows. When Elias carried the Crane boy into the square, people emerged in stunned silence. The mayor's face collapsed into disbelief and relief all at once. Behind him, Mara ran forward, her eyes bright with tears. Ash limped beside them, fur soaked and steaming in the lamplight. Someone whispered, "That dog saved them both." The words rippled through the crowd, turning into murmurs, then into something gentler. Pride. Mayor Tobias stepped closer, voice low. "I misjudged you," he admitted. "Misjudged him?" His hand trembled slightly as he reached out to scratch Ash's ear, but the dog merely looked past him to Elias, waiting. That night, the inn was filled with warmth and silence. Mara bandaged Elias's hands while Ash slept near the fire, twitching in dreams. Snow drifted past the window, lazy and harmless now. Elias watched the flames flicker, each movement reflecting pieces of the man he used to be and the man returning slowly in his place. "You found him," Mara said softly. "He found me first," Elias answered. For a long time, neither spoke. The clock ticked, the fire sighed, and the world seemed content to stay still for a moment. When Mara finally stood, she placed her hand on his shoulder. Brief, steady, enough to speak all the words they didn't need. The next morning, Hollow Creek awoke to sunlight sharp enough to make the snow shimmer like glass. The mayor's proclamation came quickly. Ash was to remain in town, an honorary rescue dog. Children painted his name on the station wall in red letters that caught every passerby's eye. Elias, though still quiet, began walking the streets again, not as the man haunted by his past, but as one still learning what forgiveness felt like. Sometimes, in the late afternoons, he and Mara would stand outside the inn, watching Ash chase the wind through the drifts. The dog would return, drop a stick at Elias's feet, and sit patiently, tail brushing the snow. Their lives had settled into something small but whole. Weeks passed. The thaw began. The river's ice cracked open, water glinting beneath. On one of those bright mornings, Elias climbed the ridge with Ash trotting ahead. From the top, he looked down at Hollow Creek, smoke curling from chimneys, roofs shining under melting frost, the kind of peace that only comes after ruin. He took off his hat, let the wind run through his hair, and spoke to no one but the sky. "We made it home," Ash barked once, the sound carrying across the valley like an echo of gratitude. Down below, the town bell rang noon. Children laughed. Life at last moved forward, and somewhere, Mrs. Callan's voice wove through the day like a quiet benediction. Sometimes grace doesn't descend from heaven. It walks beside us, on four legs, through snow and silence, until we remember we're worth saving. Elias smiled faintly. The wind brushed past him, gentle as breath. The camera of memory would pull back here. The man, the dog, the town glowing faintly beneath the winter sun. A whisper follows, meant for whoever's still listening. Maybe redemption isn't a grand rescue, but the courage to face another dawn. Maybe the wild things that find us aren't lost. They're sent. If this story reached you, let it stay a while in your heart. And if you'd like to hear the next whisper, subscribe and keep listening.